Welcome to the fourth installment of Corporate Digital Sovereignty, our five-part exploration of how tech giants are reshaping money as we know it. I'm Kaede, and today we're examining what happens when private payment systems evolve from convenient options into essential components of daily economic life. In our previous episodes, we introduced Horizon Coin as our case study of corporate currency, explored how these currencies can outcompete national ones, and investigated the profound privacy implications when payment systems and behavioral data merge. Today, we're focusing on a transformation that's perhaps even more consequential, but often less visible: the evolution of corporate financial systems into critical infrastructure, and what that means for resilience, equity, and governance in digital society. Throughout history, societies have recognized certain systems as too important to fail: water supplies, power grids, transportation networks, and traditional banking have all been deemed essential infrastructure requiring special oversight and protection. These designations weren't arbitrary, but reflected the catastrophic consequences of failure and the need for reliability above profit maximization. But today, we're witnessing something unprecedented: the rapid transformation of corporate digital platforms from optional conveniences into de facto infrastructure, without corresponding changes in their governance, accountability, or design priorities. When the same app you use for social media, entertainment, and shopping also becomes your primary financial system, the consequences of outages, policy changes, or security breaches transform from inconveniences into genuine economic emergencies. In this episode, we'll examine how corporate currencies create new forms of systemic vulnerability alongside undeniable benefits. We'll introduce Jamie, a character navigating a system outage, to illustrate how technical failures in increasingly integrated platforms create ripple effects far beyond the immediate service disruption. By drawing on academic research in critical infrastructure protection, digital resilience, and financial technology, we'll explore how convenience gradually transforms into dependency, often without corresponding safeguards. After all, most people spend far more time comparing rewards programs than considering system redundancy or governance accountability, creating an attention asymmetry that fundamentally shapes our relationship with these emerging essential services. To understand how corporate financial systems transform from convenient options into essential infrastructure, we need to examine the progressive integration pathways that gradually increase dependency. Traditional financial infrastructure developed through intentional, often regulated processes specifically designed for stability and resilience: banking systems with capital requirements, payment networks with redundancy guarantees, and clearing mechanisms with failure safeguards. These systems weren't perfect, but their design priorities emphasized reliability under stress, with convenience as a secondary consideration. They were purpose-built for critical financial functions, with architectural choices explicitly acknowledging their essential role in economic life. It's like the difference between a highway designed for consistent all-weather operation versus a private road optimized for pleasant Sunday drives. Corporate digital currencies fundamentally transform this paradigm through progressive integration, where initially optional features gradually become essential components of daily life. The pathway typically follows a predictable pattern: introduction with compelling adoption incentives making initial use attractive, expansion through feature integration connecting financial functions with other platform services, habituation where convenience creates persistent usage patterns, and finally, dependency establishment where alternatives become inefficient or inaccessible. This creates what researchers call convenience lock-in, where initial voluntary adoption gradually evolves into practical necessity despite maintaining theoretical optionality. Users don't wake up one day to find themselves dependent on corporate financial systems. Instead, they slide gradually into dependency through a series of seemingly reasonable convenience-maximizing decisions. The technical mechanisms enabling this transformation include cross-platform functionality, where financial activities connect seamlessly with other services. Integrated identity systems, where authentication processes unify across platform components. And frictionless transitions, where movement between services becomes increasingly automatic. The business models driving implementation focus on engagement maximization, where financial activities drive platform participation. Ecosystem expansion, where dependency on one service increases adoption of others. And switching cost elevation, where integrated services make alternatives increasingly inconvenient. This creates fundamentally different system priorities compared to traditional financial infrastructure, optimizing for user engagement and platform value rather than stability under stress. The difference isn't just theoretical but architectural, like comparing buildings designed primarily for aesthetic appeal versus those built to withstand earthquakes. To understand these abstract concepts in practical terms, let's meet Jamie, a fictional character experiencing the real consequences of infrastructure dependency during a system failure. Jamie is a 29-year-old urban professional who relies on Horizon's ecosystem for daily activities including social networking, media consumption, shopping, and increasingly, financial management through Horizon Coin. Like many users, she adopted the platform gradually, first for basic shopping, then for recurring subscriptions, eventually for bill payments, and ultimately for her primary checking account through Horizon's banking services. The seamless integration across services made this transition natural, with each step offering tangible convenience benefits and compelling rewards that made alternatives seem increasingly cumbersome. Her usage patterns now include automatic bill payments, subscription services, daily transactions, and even her rent payment, all flowing through a single integrated financial system. Jamie's experience with infrastructure vulnerability begins unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning when attempting a routine coffee purchase. Her payment fails with a generic error message, initially seeming like a minor technical glitch. Checking her Horizon app reveals a system-wide outage affecting all platform services including payments, account access, and communication functions. What initially appears as a temporary inconvenience gradually reveals itself as something more consequential. With no access to her primary financial resources, Jamie faces cascading complications. Unable to purchase breakfast or lunch, access transportation funds for her commute, retrieve important documents stored in cloud services, or communicate through her primary messaging system. Most concerning, she cannot access alternative financial resources because her backup payment cards and banking details are stored exclusively in the now inaccessible platform wallet. As the outage extends from hours into a full day, Jamie experiences the full implications of infrastructure dependency without corresponding protections. With no official communication channels functioning, information spreads primarily through unofficial sources with varying reliability. Most significantly, she discovers that service restoration follows tier-based prioritization. Users with premium membership levels receive priority access recovery, while standard users face extended waiting periods. This creates what researchers call differential resilience, where system recovery reflects commercial priorities rather than need-based considerations. The experience fundamentally changes Jamie's perception of the platform. What had appeared as a collection of convenient services reveals itself as essential infrastructure operating without the reliability guarantees or equitable access protections traditionally associated with critical systems. The platform hadn't changed, but her understanding of her relationship with it transformed completely. Jamie's experience highlights a critical emerging aspect of corporate financial infrastructure: the development of tiered access systems, creating fundamentally different experiences during both normal operation and crisis situations. Traditional financial infrastructure operated through relatively standardized service levels, where basic functionality remained consistent across user categories despite some premium options. While additional services existed for higher-value customers, core banking functions maintained similar accessibility, reliability, and functionality regardless of customer status. This created what infrastructure specialists call service universality, where essential functions remain consistently available across demographic and economic categories. While traditional banking certainly had exclusion problems, they typically manifested through complete denial of service rather than dramatically different reliability levels for accepted customers. Corporate digital currencies fundamentally transform this landscape through systematic service stratification, where user experience varies dramatically across membership tiers. This stratification manifests through differential reliability, where system stability varies between user categories, priority recovery, where service restoration follows commercial rather than need-based priorities, feature availability, where essential functions appear exclusively in higher tiers, support accessibility, where assistance quality and responsiveness vary dramatically, and dispute resolution, where issue remediation follows tier-based protocols. These differences create what researchers call algorithmic stratification, where users experience fundamentally different service reliability based primarily on commercial value rather than functional necessity. This transforms financial infrastructure from a relatively standardized utility to a highly differentiated service landscape, where reliability becomes a premium feature rather than a baseline expectation. The consequences of this stratified infrastructure extend beyond convenience differences through protection disparities, where service stability correlates with economic status, resilience inequality, where recovery from disruption follows commercial priorities, and functional exclusion, where essential capabilities become available exclusively through premium tiers. This creates what social researchers describe as digital redlining, where access to reliable essential services varies systematically by socioeconomic status. Most concerning are the crisis implications. When systems fail, recovery priorities reflect commercial relationships rather than human necessities, creating fundamentally different experiences during the most vulnerable moments. The financial system no longer functions as a standardized platform, but increasingly as a tiered experience, where stability itself becomes a luxury good rather than a universal expectation. Academic research provides crucial context for understanding the governance implications when private systems perform increasingly public functions. In his landmark research on critical digital infrastructure, Stanford economist Darrell Duffy identified the fundamental governance mismatch that occurs when systems designed for commercial priorities gradually assume essential social functions. Private digital platforms optimize for metrics like user engagement, revenue generation, and competitive differentiation, entirely appropriate objectives for optional services, but potentially problematic for essential infrastructure. This creates what governance scholars call misaligned incentives, where commercial priorities potentially conflict with public necessities in system design, operation, and crisis response. The concerning aspect isn't corporate involvement in financial services, but rather the governance gap that emerges when essential functions operate without corresponding public accountability mechanisms. Research specifically examining corporate financial systems identifies unique resilience challenges created through integration effects, where previously separate functions become interdependent. Technical complexity making comprehensive risk assessment increasingly difficult, and operational opacity where critical processes function without external visibility. These characteristics create what resilience researchers call tightly coupled systems, where failures in one component can cascade rapidly through connected functions with limited intervention opportunities. Most concerning is the emerging too-big-to-fail dynamic without corresponding regulatory frameworks, where systems become essential to economic functioning without the stability requirements, capital reserves, or oversight mechanisms traditionally applied to systemically important financial institutions. This represents what scholars describe as privatized infrastructure without public safeguards. Essential systems operating outside the protective frameworks developed through decades of financial stability policy. Emerging research specifically examining corporate digital currencies identifies accessibility concerns largely absent from traditional infrastructure discussions, primarily how essential financial functions increasingly operate through private membership rather than public right. Studies document what researchers call the terms of service governance paradigm, where critical economic access operates through commercial agreements rather than rights-based frameworks. This creates what research describes as algorithmic exclusion, where essential service access depends increasingly on automated assessments operating without transparency, consistency requirements, or meaningful appeal mechanisms. These dynamics explain why infrastructure scholars increasingly call for new governance frameworks, recognizing the hybrid public-private nature of these emerging essential systems. Acknowledging their commercial origins, while establishing appropriate safeguards, reflecting their increasingly critical social functions. The business model driving corporate financial infrastructure development operates through what researchers call the loyalty escalator, a sophisticated system designed to progressively increase user dependency through staged benefits and integrated services. The primary implementation mechanisms include reward acceleration, where benefits increase with usage concentration, ecosystem expansion, where financial activities unlock advantages across platform services, and switching cost elevation, where integrated functions make alternatives increasingly impractical. The metrics reveal substantial behavioral impact. Users migrating 73–86% of financial activities to platforms offering modest but visible rewards. Integrated service users becoming 4–7x less likely to consider alternatives despite competitive offers. And convenience features substantially outperforming price advantages in retention effectiveness. This creates economic incentives, fundamentally prioritizing ecosystem expansion over reliability enhancement. Essentially, financial services become customer acquisition and retention mechanisms for the broader platform rather than independently optimized services. The loyalty mechanisms driving increasing dependence operate through sophisticated psychological frameworks, leveraging immediate reward visibility, where benefits appear prominently, while dependencies remain subtle. Loss aversion, where accumulated benefits create reluctance to consider alternatives. And ecosystem familiarity, where cognitive ease creates preference for integrated services despite potential disadvantages. These systems specifically exploit what behavioral economists call present bias, emphasizing immediate convenience while obscuring long-term dependency implications. Visible rewards capturing attention while reliability concerns remain abstract. Integration benefits appearing daily while vulnerability costs remain theoretical. And convenience advantages demonstrating immediately while resilience disadvantages emerge only during crises. This creates adoption patterns, systematically prioritizing short-term benefits over long-term resilience considerations, driving reasonable individual choices that collectively create systemic vulnerabilities. The strategic value of this loyalty-driven infrastructure extends beyond immediate revenue through dependency creation, where ecosystem integration substantially increases switching barriers. Data value enhancement, where financial activities reveal highly predictive behavioral patterns. And market position reinforcement, where essential service provision strengthens competitive advantages across adjacent markets. This creates what economists call infrastructure leverage, where control over essential functions creates influence extending far beyond the immediate service boundaries. The ultimate strategic objective involves comprehensive ecosystem development, enabling increasingly automated service delivery. Essentially using financial integration to build sufficiently complete profiles that preferences can be anticipated rather than explicitly expressed, creating convenience through prediction, but also dependency through comprehensive integration. The resilience challenges of corporate financial infrastructure become most visible during failure scenarios, revealing vulnerabilities often invisible during normal operations. Traditional financial infrastructure operated through distributed architecture, where individual institution failures rarely threatened systemic functions. Redundancy requirements establishing backup systems for critical components, and separation principles limiting cascading failures across service boundaries. These systems also function through explicit failure planning, including regulatory stress testing, simulating crisis scenarios, capital requirements ensuring operational continuity during disruptions, and documented recovery processes with legally mandated prioritization frameworks. This created what resilience engineers call graceful degradation, where systems maintain essential functionality during partial failures rather than experiencing complete collapse. Traditional banking certainly experienced crises, but their design explicitly acknowledged this possibility with corresponding protective measures. Corporate financial infrastructure creates fundamentally different failure characteristics through integrated system architecture, where previously separate functions operate through connected technical components. Centralized control structures, where single operational centers manage multiple essential services, and streamlined efficiency, eliminating redundancies that appear costly during normal operation. The implementation occurs through cloud-based infrastructure, potentially creating single points of failure. Unified authentication systems, where identity verification failures affect multiple services simultaneously. And optimization priorities focusing on normal operation efficiency rather than crisis resilience. This creates what systems theorists call brittle architecture, where highly efficient systems operate reliably under expected conditions, but experience catastrophic rather than gradual failure when boundaries are exceeded. The system doesn't just perform less effectively during stress, it potentially experiences complete functional collapse. The consequences of these architectural choices extend beyond technical considerations through information asymmetry, where users receive limited visibility during failures. Communication dependencies, where notification systems may fail alongside core services. And recovery prioritization reflecting commercial considerations rather than critical needs. The societal implications include differential impact, where system failures affect populations unequally. Service gaps, where essential functions lack guaranteed alternatives, and responsibility diffusion, where accountability becomes unclear despite essential service disruption. This represents what resilience experts describe as critical infrastructure without corresponding protections, where systems essential to daily economic functioning operate without the reliability guarantees, redundancy requirements, or equitable restoration frameworks typically associated with critical services. The system failures aren't just inconvenient but potentially catastrophic for increasingly dependent users. The evolution of corporate payment systems creates what governance researchers call the digital citizenship model, where platform relationships increasingly resemble citizenship structures rather than mere consumer arrangements. Traditional financial services operated through relatively standardized relationships, where terms remained consistent regardless of usage patterns. Dispute processes followed documented procedures with consistent application. And service access remained relatively stable over time rather than reflecting behavioral assessment. This created what contract scholars call bounded commercial relationships, where interactions occurred through clearly defined terms with limited connection to personal characteristics or behaviors outside the immediate service context. Banking relationships might be frustrating, but they rarely engaged with broader aspects of personal identity or behavior beyond narrow financial considerations. Corporate financial platforms fundamentally transform this relationship through comprehensive behavior assessment, where service terms reflect broader patterns beyond immediate financial activities. personalized governance where policies apply differently across user categories, and integrated evaluation where financial standing connects with social, communication, and platform conduct. The operational implementation occurs through behavioral scoring, where algorithmic systems assess comprehensive user patterns. Terms personalization, where conditions vary based on individual metrics. And tiered relationships, where service levels reflect platform-determined user categories. This creates what governance scholars call quasi-citizenship, where platform relationships extend far beyond traditional commercial boundaries to encompass multiple aspects of digital life under unified governance frameworks. The system doesn't just process your payments, but increasingly evaluates your standing within a comprehensive governance system. The consequences of this governance transformation extend beyond immediate financial services through differential treatment, where technical and policy implementations vary across user categories. Opportunity stratification, where options presented depend on algorithmic assessment. And continuous evaluation, where status remains perpetually adjustable rather than stable. The broader implications include governance hybridization, where corporate rule systems increasingly perform traditionally public functions. Policy opacity, where rules operate without transparency or consistency requirements. And appeal limitations, where dispute processes remain entirely within platform jurisdiction. This represents what political scientists describe as privatized governance, where increasingly essential economic and social functions operate through corporate rather than public rule frameworks despite their growing importance in daily life. The corporate financial system isn't just processing transactions, but increasingly establishing and enforcing rules structuring digital economic participation. An honest assessment of corporate financial infrastructure must acknowledge genuine benefits alongside significant concerns. The efficiency advantages include integrated service delivery eliminating friction between previously separate functions, unified management simplifying previously complex financial activities, and automated optimization adjusting to individual patterns without requiring manual intervention. The innovation benefits include rapid feature development unconstrained by legacy systems, technology integration leveraging advanced capabilities across services, and responsive design adapting quickly to emerging user needs. These benefits explain why rational individuals adopt these systems despite potential concerns. They solve genuine problems while offering immediate, tangible advantages that traditional financial infrastructure often fails to provide. However, the comprehensive costs extend far beyond individual convenience trade-offs through resilience reduction, where optimization eliminates redundancy necessary during crises, governance gaps, where essential functions operate outside accountability frameworks, and equity concerns where service quality and reliability stratify along socioeconomic lines. The societal implications include dependency formation, where essential functions increasingly require corporate membership, infrastructure vulnerability, where critical economic activities operate through systems designed primarily for engagement, and public function privatization, where traditionally governmental responsibilities migrate to corporate management without corresponding democratic controls. This creates what social theorists call convenience authoritarianism, where incremental efficiency choices gradually concentrate essential functions under private governance regimes optimized for metrics other than public welfare. The expansion of corporate infrastructure into essential financial activities reflects broader questions about resilience priorities in digital society, specifically how systems balance efficiency with necessary redundancy, what protection standards should apply to increasingly essential services, and how accountability should function when private systems perform public functions. The fundamental challenge involves aligning innovation with appropriate safeguards, creating systems that deliver genuine convenience and utility while maintaining necessary resilience for functions becoming increasingly essential to economic participation. This requires moving beyond individual consumer choices to consider collective infrastructure standards, recognizing that system resilience increasingly requires structural solutions rather than personal management. The questions raised by corporate financial infrastructure ultimately reflect deeper tensions between innovation capabilities and resilience necessities in our increasingly integrated digital economy. As we conclude our exploration of financial infrastructure transformation, let's extract 3 essential insights. First, understand that corporate financial platforms fundamentally reshape resilience dynamics through integration, effects creating new forms of systemic vulnerability. When previously separate functions combine within unified technical architecture, it creates efficiency gains during normal operation, but potentially catastrophic failure modes during crises. The resulting resilience profile isn't merely quantitatively different from traditional financial infrastructure, but qualitatively distinct, creating brittle systems performing exceptionally well under expected conditions, but vulnerable to cascading failures when boundaries are exceeded. This isn't simple service disruption, but increasingly represents essential infrastructure instability, affecting fundamental economic activities. Second, recognize that service stratification fundamentally changes how infrastructure reliability operates through tiered performance, creating different experiences across user categories. Corporate platforms increasingly differentiate service levels, not just through premium features, but through fundamental reliability differences, affecting essential functions during both normal operation and crisis scenarios. This creates what researchers call resilience inequality, where system stability and recovery become variable based on commercial relationships rather than functional necessity. Most significantly, this stratified infrastructure operates largely outside traditional utility frameworks despite performing increasingly similar social functions. Public infrastructure traditionally functioned through relatively consistent service delivery. Corporate infrastructure increasingly delivers fundamentally different experiences based on tier categorization. Finally, understand that effective responses require balancing innovation with appropriate safeguards rather than simply accepting false dichotomies. The infrastructure questions facing digital society aren't simple choices between convenience and resilience, but rather nuanced decisions about appropriate standards for increasingly essential systems. This suggests approaches focusing on resilience requirements, establishing clear expectations for systems reaching critical adoption thresholds, governance frameworks ensuring appropriate accountability for increasingly essential functions, and protection standards establishing baseline guarantees regardless of commercial relationships. Like many complex systems challenges, digital infrastructure increasingly requires thoughtful frameworks rather than market forces alone, establishing sustainable governance for our shared digital infrastructure while preserving innovation benefits. In our final episode, we'll step back to examine the broader implications of corporate digital currencies for economic sovereignty and democratic governance, exploring the fundamental questions these systems raise about power distribution in digital society. We'll investigate how the timeline of adoption frequently outpaces regulatory frameworks, the emerging governance vacuums where traditional jurisdictional boundaries become increasingly irrelevant, and the sovereignty paradox where immediate convenience choices gradually establish long-term dependencies with significant democratic implications. And we'll do this through careful consideration of competing stakeholder visions for digital currency futures. We'll analyze how historical monetary transitions provide crucial context for understanding current transformations, examining how past shifts from commodity to fiat currency created similar regulatory lags before appropriate governance frameworks emerged. This historical perspective reveals patterns in how major monetary transitions typically unfold. Initial excitement about new capabilities, rapid adoption outpacing regulatory understanding, emerging problems revealing governance gaps, and eventually, new frameworks establishing appropriate boundaries. These patterns suggest we're currently in the critical period between widespread adoption and comprehensive governance, precisely when thoughtful public engagement matters most for shaping long-term outcomes. As you consider these developments, watch for infrastructure indicators in your own financial experiences. How many daily activities now depend on platforms originally designed for other purposes? Which essential functions increasingly operate through private membership rather than public access? And where convenience has gradually transformed formerly optional services into practical necessities. The evolution of payment systems from traditional financial infrastructure to engagement-optimized platforms represents one of the most significant yet understated shifts in modern economic life, changing not just how we pay for things, but who controls essential functions, how they're governed, and who benefits from their operation. Before we conclude, I want to thank you for joining us for this fourth installment of our 5-part series examining corporate digital sovereignty. Your engagement with these complex issues matters, because shaping technologies that increasingly structure economic participation requires precisely the awareness and thoughtful consideration you've demonstrated by exploring these questions with us. Until next time, I'm Kaede, reminding you that in the evolving relationship between convenience and resilience, the most important question isn't what immediate benefits new systems provide, but whether they're designed to support us during the moments when we need them most.